My name is Mark, and if there's one thing I thought I knew, it was loyalty, both from my wife, Emily, and my younger brother, Jason. We were a close-knit family, or at least that's what I had always believed. We had shared holidays, birthdays, and countless memories together. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that the two people I trusted most would betray me in the worst possible way. Emily and I had been married for 8 years. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but I thought we had built something solid. We had a beautiful home, stable jobs, and a future that seemed certain. And Jason, he was more than just a brother. He was my best friend, someone I had always looked out for, someone I would have done anything for. It was a Friday night, one like any other, or so I thought. I had planned to work late at the office, trying to get ahead on a project. But around 8 p.m., I decided to surprise Emily by coming home early. I thought we could have a quiet dinner, maybe even watch a movie. Little did I know, I was walking into a nightmare. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Jason's car parked out front. It wasn't unusual for him to drop by unannounced. He was family, after all. But something felt off as I approached the front door. The house was too quiet, too still. My heart began to race, a feeling of dread washing over me, but I pushed it aside and stepped inside. I made my way through the house, calling out for Emily, but there was no answer. The unease grew as I walked down the hallway toward our bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and that's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. I heard Emily's voice, mixed with another, Jason's voice. I pushed the door open, and there they were, tangled together in our bed, too lost in each other to notice me standing there. The scene in front of me was like a punch to the gut, knocking the wind out of me. My wife and my brother, together, in the most intimate way possible. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mind went blank as I stared at the two people who had just shattered my world. But then the shock began to give way to something darker, something more dangerous. The betrayal cut deep, the pain so intense it felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching as they finally realized I was in the room. The look on Emily's face was one of pure horror, while Jason's was filled with guilt. But no amount of words or apologies could fix what they had just done. I turned and walked out of the room, my mind already racing with thoughts of what I would do next. I knew this was just the beginning. This betrayal wouldn't go unanswered. I was going to make them both pay for what they had done, and I was going to make sure they never forgot it. As I walked out of the bedroom, leaving Emily and Jason behind, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, and disbelief battled for dominance, but I knew I needed to stay focused. This wasn't the time to confront them, not yet. I needed to be strategic, to make sure that when I did strike, it would be a blow they wouldn't recover from. I headed to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking with rage. The sound of footsteps behind me told me they had followed me, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to look at them, not while the image of them together was still seared into my brain. Mark, I can explain. Emily's voice trembled, a mix of fear and desperation. I clenched the glass tighter, feeling the urge to throw it against the wall, but I forced myself to stay calm. There's nothing to explain, I said, my voice cold and controlled. I saw everything. Jason stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Mark, I'm sorry. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake. Please, let's talk about this. I finally turned to face them, my eyes locking onto theirs. The sight of them standing there, side by side, made my stomach churn. They looked so small, so pathetic, and yet the pain they had caused me was enormous. There's nothing to talk about, I replied, my voice steady. You both made your choices, and now you'll have to live with the consequences. Without waiting for a response, I walked past them and headed for the front door. I needed to get out of the house, to clear my head and figure out what my next move would be. They called after me, but I didn't stop. I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing through the night. As I drove aimlessly through the city, I replayed the scene over and over in my mind. The betrayal was like a poison, spreading through my veins, filling me with a cold, calculating rage. I knew that confronting them now would be pointless. They would just apologize, beg for forgiveness, and try to move on. But I wasn't going to let them off that easily. I parked the car in a deserted lot and sat there in the darkness, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine. I needed to think, to plan. I wasn't just going to confront them. I was going to destroy them, piece by piece. Over the next few days, I kept my distance from Emily and Jason. I avoided the house as much as possible, only coming home late at night when I knew they would be asleep. During the day, I threw myself into work, using the long hours as a distraction from the pain that gnawed at me. But in the back of my mind, the plan was already taking shape. I started by gathering information. I knew that if I wanted to make them pay, I needed to hit them where it hurt the most. Emily's life revolved around her reputation. She prided herself on being seen as the perfect wife, the perfect professional. Jason, on the other hand, was always chasing success, trying to prove himself to everyone around him. They both had vulnerabilities, and I was going to exploit them. I began by documenting everything. I installed hidden cameras around the house, capturing every interaction between Emily and Jason. I also went through their phones, reading their messages and taking screenshots of every incriminating text. The more I uncovered, the deeper my resolve became. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now it was my turn to betray them. But it wasn't enough just to collect evidence. I needed to plan out exactly how I would use it. I reached out to a private investigator I knew, someone who specialized in digging up dirt on people. I hired him to follow Jason, to uncover any secrets he might be hiding. If there was more to his life than I knew, I was going to find out. As the days went by, I became more and more detached from the life I had once known. Emily tried to talk to me, to apologize, but I brushed her off, pretending to be too busy to deal with her. Jason, too, seemed to be avoiding me, as if he knew that the time for reckoning was coming. And he was right. The private investigator came through for me in ways I hadn't expected. Not only did he find out that Jason had been embezzling money from his company, but he also discovered that Emily had been helping him cover it up. They were partners in more ways than one, it seemed. The information was like a gift, handed to me on a silver platter. Armed with this new knowledge, I began to lay the groundwork for their downfall. I started by leaking the embezzlement information to Jason's boss, making sure it couldn't be traced back to me. The fallout was immediate. Jason was suspended from his job, pending an investigation. He tried to act as if everything was under control, but I could see the panic in his eyes. He knew that his career, his future, was crumbling before him. Emily was next. I sent an anonymous tip to her employer, revealing her role in the cover-up. She was called into a meeting, where she was confronted with the evidence. She tried to deny it at first, but the proof was undeniable. She was placed on leave, her pristine reputation tarnished beyond repair. Watching them both scramble, trying to salvage their lives, gave me a grim satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. I had more in store for them, something that would ensure they never recovered from the damage they had caused. With their careers in shambles, I knew that Emily and Jason would be more desperate than ever. They would cling to each other, seeking comfort in the one person who understood what they were going through. But that was exactly what I wanted. The closer they became, the easier it would be to trap them. I waited until they thought the worst was behind them, until they started to believe they could rebuild what they had lost. Then, I struck. I sent Emily a message, pretending to be a former coworker who had heard about her situation and wanted to help. I offered her a job, something that sounded too good to be true. She took the bait, of course. She had no other options. She agreed to meet with me, not knowing that I was the one behind it all. Jason, too, was easy to manipulate. I sent him a similar message, posing as someone who could help him get back on his feet. He was eager to meet, desperate for any opportunity to fix his ruined career. The meeting was set, and I made sure it was in a place where they wouldn't be seen. When they arrived, expecting a lifeline, they found me instead. The look on their faces when they saw me was priceless. Pure shock, mixed with fear and confusion. They had no idea what was coming. Surprised to see me? I asked, my voice calm and controlled. What the hell is this? Jason demanded, trying to keep his composure. This, I said, holding up the evidence I had collected, is the end of the line for both of you. Emily's face went pale as she realized what I was holding. Mark, please, we can talk about this. We can work it out. I shook my head, a cold smile spreading across my face. There's nothing to work out. You've both made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences. I laid out everything, the embezzlement, the cover-up, the affair. I made sure they knew that their lives were over, that there was no coming back from what they had done. They tried to plead, to beg for mercy, but I wasn't interested in hearing their excuses. They had taken everything from me, and now it was my turn. With the evidence in hand, I went public. I sent it to their employers, their friends, their families. I made sure that everyone knew what they had done, that their reputations were destroyed beyond repair. The fallout was swift and brutal. Jason was fired, his career in ruins. His wife, who had once looked up to him as a role model, left him, taking their children with her. He was alone, his life shattered, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. Emily, too, was left with nothing. Her job was gone, her friends abandoned her, and her once perfect life was in tatters. She tried to reach out to me, to apologize, but I ignored her. She didn't deserve my forgiveness. With their lives in ruins, I decided it was time for the final blow. I wasn't just going to destroy them. I was going to make sure they never forgot what they had done. I arranged a meeting between them, pretending to be someone who could help them get back on their feet. They arrived, hopeful, desperate for any chance to rebuild their lives. But instead of help, they found me, standing there with the final piece of evidence, their affair. I showed them the photos, the messages, the proof that their betrayal had been laid bare for the world to see. They begged for mercy, for a chance to make things right, but I was done playing nice. You destroyed everything, I told them, my voice cold and unforgiving. And now, you're going to live with that for the rest of your lives. With that, I walked away, leaving them to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. In the weeks that followed, I watched from a distance as Emily and Jason struggled to cope with the aftermath of their actions. They were both broken, their lives in ruins, and there was no way for them to recover. I had taken everything from them, just as they had taken everything from me. But even as I watched them suffer, I felt a sense of emptiness. The satisfaction I had hoped for was fleeting, replaced by a hollow feeling that gnawed at me. I had destroyed them, but in doing so, I had destroyed a part of myself as well. I tried to move on, to put the past behind me, but the memories of what had happened lingered. The image of them together, the sound of their voices as they pleaded for mercy. It was all burned into my mind, a constant reminder of the pain they had caused. As time went on, I began to realize that my revenge had come at a cost. I had lost everything, my wife, my brother, and even the sense of peace that I had once known. The satisfaction I had felt in bringing them down was fleeting, replaced by a cold emptiness that settled deep in my bones. I had been so focused on making them pay that I hadn't stopped to think about what would be left for me afterward. The house, once filled with laughter and life, was now a silent reminder of what I had lost. Every room held memories of Emily and Jason, moments that had once been happy but were now tainted by betrayal. I found myself avoiding the places where we had spent time together, unable to face the ghosts of the past. Work became my only refuge. I threw myself into my job, taking on every project I could, trying to drown out the thoughts that plagued me. But no matter how hard I worked, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was missing. The anger that had fueled me for so long had burned out, leaving behind nothing but a hollow shell. I started to question whether it had all been worth it. I had destroyed their lives, but in doing so, I had also destroyed my own. The friends who had once stood by me began to drift away, uncomfortable with the man I had become. I couldn't blame them. I barely recognized myself anymore. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, a bottle of whiskey in hand, I realized that I had nothing left. The people who had once mattered to me were gone, and I had pushed away anyone who might have helped me rebuild. I had won the battle, but I had lost everything else. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had become the very thing I had despised: cold, ruthless, and empty. I had let my anger consume me, and now there was nothing left but the ashes of a life I had destroyed. It had been months since I had seen either Emily or Jason. After our final confrontation, they had both disappeared from my life, and I had made no effort to find out where they had gone. But one evening, as I was walking through the city, I saw someone familiar sitting on a bench in the park. It was Jason. He looked terrible. His hair was unkempt, his clothes were wrinkled, and he had a haunted look in his eyes that made him appear much older than he was. He was staring down at the ground, lost in thought, completely unaware of my presence. For a moment, I considered walking away, leaving him to his misery. But something stopped me. I don't know if it was curiosity or some lingering sense of brotherly duty, but I found myself walking over to him and sitting down on the bench next to him. He looked up at me, his eyes widening in surprise. "Mark," he said, his voice hoarse, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "You look like hell, Jason." He let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, I guess I deserve it, don't I?" I didn't respond right away. Seeing him like this stirred something inside me. Pity, maybe, or a sense of loss for the brother I had once known. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. Finally, Jason spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mark, for everything. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I could see that he meant it. The arrogance, the bravado that had once defined him, was gone. In its place was a broken man, consumed by guilt and regret. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Jason," I said, my voice steady, "but I appreciate that you're saying it." He nodded, accepting my words without argument. We sat there for a while longer, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. I knew that nothing would ever be the same between us, that the bond we had once shared was shattered beyond repair. But in that moment, I realized that holding on to my anger wasn't helping anyone, least of all myself. As I stood up to leave, I turned to him one last time. "Take care of yourself, Jason," I said, and I meant it. "Don't let this destroy you." He nodded again, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I walked away, leaving him on that bench, knowing that whatever happened next was out of my hands. Despite the encounter with Jason, the emptiness inside me only grew. I tried to push forward, to find some semblance of normalcy in my life, but it was like trying to hold on to sand. It kept slipping through my fingers. The nights were the worst, filled with memories that wouldn't leave me alone, regrets that gnawed at my soul. I started drinking more, using alcohol to numb the pain that I couldn't seem to escape. It worked for a while, but the more I drank, the more I realized that I was only sinking deeper into the void. The man I had been, the life I had lived, felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to someone else. Work, which had once been my refuge, became a burden. I couldn't focus, couldn't find the motivation to care about the projects that had once consumed my attention. My colleagues noticed the change in me, and soon enough, the whispers started. People talked about how I had changed, how I wasn't the same person I used to be. They were right, I wasn't. One day, I was called into a meeting with my boss. He was a good man, someone who had always supported me, but I could see the concern in his eyes as I sat down across from him. "Mark, I'm worried about you," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "You've been slipping lately, and it's affecting your work. I know you've been through a lot, but you need to pull yourself together." I wanted to tell him that I was fine, that I could handle it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, staring down at the floor. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'm giving you some time off," he said. "Take a few weeks, clear your head, and come back when you're ready. We'll be here when you are." I didn't argue. I knew he was right. I needed to get away, to figure out what the hell I was going to do with my life. I thanked him and left the office, feeling like I was walking in a daze. That night, as I sat in the darkness of my living room, I realized that I had hit rock bottom. There was nowhere left to go, nothing left to lose. The revenge that had once driven me had left me empty, and I didn't know how to fill the void it had created. A week into my forced leave, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Emily. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I wanted to read whatever she had to say. But curiosity got the better of me, and I carefully tore open the envelope. The letter was short, handwritten in her familiar script. It was an apology, but it was more than that. It was a confession. She admitted to everything: the affair with Jason, the lies, the deception. She wrote about how she had lost herself in the process, how she had destroyed the life we had built together. But what struck me the most was the final paragraph. She wrote about how she couldn't live with the guilt anymore, how it was eating her alive. She said she was leaving town, going somewhere far away where she could start over, where no one knew who she was or what she had done. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She knew it wasn't something she could expect. But she ended the letter by saying that she hoped, one day, I could find peace, that we both could. I stared at the letter for a long time after I finished reading it, trying to process what it meant. Emily was gone. Really gone this time. And with her departure, the last thread that connected me to my old life was severed. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt a deep sense of loss. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain, there had been a time when I had loved her, when we had shared a life together. And now, that life was gone, leaving behind only memories and regrets. With Emily's departure, I found myself at a crossroads. I could continue down the path I had been on, letting the anger and bitterness consume me, or I could try to find a way out of the darkness. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Nothing about this situation was, but I was tired of feeling like a ghost in my own life. I decided to reach out to a therapist, someone who could help me make sense of the mess I had made of my life. The first few sessions were hard, talking about everything that had happened, confronting the emotions I had buried deep inside. But slowly, I began to feel a shift, a small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way forward. The therapist helped me see that the revenge I had sought had been a way to cope with the pain, but it had only deepened the wounds. She encouraged me to the therapist helped me see that the revenge I had sought had been a way to cope with the pain, but it had only deepened the wounds. She encouraged me to explore the emotions I had been avoiding: grief, anger, sadness, and to confront the reality that I had been trying so hard to escape. It wasn't an easy process, and there were days when I wanted to give up, to retreat back into the numbness that had become my comfort zone. But little by little, I began to see things differently. I started to understand that the only way to heal was to let go of the past, to stop clinging to the anger that had fueled me for so long. It was easier said than done. Every time I thought about Emily and Jason, the old feelings would resurface, threatening to pull me back into the darkness. But I was determined to keep moving forward, to find some semblance of peace. One of the hardest parts was coming to terms with my own role in everything that had happened. It was easy to blame Emily and Jason for their betrayal, but I had to face the fact that my obsession with revenge had driven me to make choices that had hurt not only them but also myself. I had let my anger consume me, and in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was. As I worked through these emotions, I found myself thinking more and more about what the therapist had said, about finding a way to forgive, not just them, but myself as well. It seemed impossible at first, but I knew it was the only way I could truly move on. I started by writing a letter, not to send, but for myself. I wrote about everything: my anger, my pain, my regrets. I poured out all the feelings I had been holding inside, letting the words flow onto the page. It was a cathartic experience, one that left me feeling lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. When I finished, I didn't feel the need to hold on to the letter. I took it outside and burned it, watching as the flames consumed the paper, turning it to ash. It was a symbolic act, a way of letting go of the past and everything that had happened. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my life. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the memories would resurface, when the guilt and regret would threaten to overwhelm me. But I was learning how to cope, how to manage those feelings without letting them control me. I started reconnecting with old friends, people I had pushed away during the worst of it all. Some of them welcomed me back with open arms, while others were more hesitant, unsure of the man I had become. I couldn't blame them. I had changed, and not all of it was for the better. But I was working on it, trying to become the person I wanted to be, rather than the one I had allowed myself to become. Work became a refuge once again, but this time, it wasn't about escaping my emotions. I found purpose in what I was doing, and it helped me feel grounded, connected to something larger than myself. My boss noticed the change in me when I returned from leave, and we had a long conversation about everything that had happened. He didn't pry, but he made it clear that he was there for me, that he believed in my ability to move forward. As the months turned into a year, I began to feel like I was finally coming out on the other side. The anger that had once defined me was fading, replaced by a quiet determination to build a new life, one that wasn't defined by the past. I hadn't heard from Emily since the letter, and I didn't expect to. I hoped she had found some peace, wherever she had gone, just as I was finding mine. Jason and I had parted ways after our last encounter, and I doubted we would ever see each other again. But that was okay. We were both on our own paths now, and I wished him the best, even if our paths never crossed again. In the end, the revenge that had once seemed so important had only brought me pain. It had taken time, effort, and a willingness to face the truth, but I was finally learning how to let go. I was ready to start over, to create a life that was mine, free from the shadows of the past. And so, I took the first steps into this new chapter, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but confident that I was on the right path. I had lost so much, but I had gained something too, a chance to rebuild, to find happiness again. And that was worth everything.